Good morning, everybody. My name is James Atkinson, and I am a scientist and engineer who has been hunting spies, informants, and snitches for close to 50 years professionally. I talk about hunting spies and neutralizing snitches, stopping the invasion of privacy and shutting down espionage, no matter who the spy is or who the snitch may be. This morning's video is all about TSCM and a modern eavesdropping threat, and specifically about the various types of TSCM services and TSCM activities which take place, so that you have a broad understanding of what things are. However, I do have a video on each of these, which is a multi-hour video on each, where I go through demonstrations, show you maps, explain how these different types are executed. You will find this to be a very, very fascinating subject, so grab a cup of coffee and prepare to be amazed. Now, there are many types of TSCM services, and we're going to cover some of these. But this is not all TSCM services, because certain TSCM services need to be kept, shall we say, private. Now, the first of these is the vulnerability analysis. Next is a old school TSCM inspection. Another service is in-place monitoring, which we're going to cover. Then there is a full TSCM survey or a sweep. Then an in-place monitoring plus TSCM. We call that an IPM plus. Then there's a very dark art called rings and radials, which is something that unfortunately most TSCM people, even government TSCM people, don't know about, but we'll be covering it here. And I also need to take a moment here and point out that the entirety of this presentation is completely unclassified. It is proprietary trade secrets of Granite Island Group, which Granite Island Group has decided will be shared with you freely. Next, we have the protective detail TSCM surveys that we'll talk about. Then there is TSCM pre-construction assistance, then TSCM screening, special TSCM services, and then rain dance TSCM. Now, like I've said, each of these have a multi-hour video in a different video. So take a look around. You'll find that there's a huge number of videos on this channel. They've all been scheduled for releases a few days to a few weeks apart, so you may have to wait for one to drop. So if you're interested in the video on TSCM screening, for example, you might see it around Christmas time, or you might see it in a few days. It all depends. The release schedule is random, but it involves over 300 hours of video in this format. So vulnerability analysis is also called a threat assessment. It is a comprehensive review of the entire facility and the operation. Very commonly, these are not done by TSCM specialists. When that happens, there are things which the TSCM person can see, which no other discipline in the security community can also see. So TSCM people and TSCM specialists, they look for very specific things that a locksmith won't notice, or an alarm installer won't notice, or a physical security won't notice, or executive protection or the bodyguard teams will not notice. But a TSCM person will not miss that thing ever. They catch it 100% of the time. So you need to, if your company is going to do a threat assessment and a vulnerability analysis, one of the people who you need to bring to the project is a TSCM specialist, or somebody like me who's a scientist and an engineer who specializes in TSCM, Tempest, and related disciplines and subdisciplines. Now, a vulnerability analysis is to give risk and impact numbers to senior management. You do not do a vulnerability analysis for the IT department. You do a vulnerability analysis for the chairman of the board itself, the CEO, executive vice presidents, and your report goes all the way to the top of the company. It assigns numerical risks, numerical ratios, and estimates the impact and the potential injury that a vulnerability will cause if not corrected. Now, it's very easy for somebody to come in and say, aha, you use Macs instead of PCs, therefore, thus and so can happen. Or you're using Apple phone products and you're not using the Androids, and there's all these problems. That is an illiterate person rambling about something that they know nothing about. I'm not kidding. If you're explaining to people what a fabulous hacker you are, but you don't know basic computer programming, you're deceiving your customer. Or if you consider yourself to be a security expert because you just got out of prison, you're not. And executive management understands this. Executive management wants to know what is the number. It is 0.85% of a risk. The impact is 85%, and this is the dollar value of this. So this is the probability of it happening. These are the various ratios or levels it could be inflicted. This is the effect that it would have on the company, and this is how much it would cost the company. If it's going to cost the company $25,000 if we don't fix it, but it's going to cost $150,000 to fix, then by not doing anything and letting it become a problem, the company has profited $125,000. So these risks, these ratios, these impact numbers, they're vitally important. They can't just be some abstract number somebody pulled out of the ether. A vulnerability analysis typically requires an MBA. If you don't have it, you're not going to be able to do the numbers. If somebody has a bachelor's degree in quantitative analysis for business, they may be able to do it as well. But a vulnerability analysis is written for senior management. It goes over what needs to be enhanced, what can be done to reduce vulnerabilities of sensitive areas or sensitive documents, and in my specific field, it's to reduce the vulnerability to technical surveillance attacks. It's going to be a formal vulnerability analysis. You should have these done before you engage somebody to do a bug sweep. So you need to have somebody come in, do a vulnerability analysis, find all the problems, clean the problems up, square everything away. Then you can have repetitive TSCM inspections or Tempest inspections or nonstop certifications or hijack cert, which are all areas of emissions control and emissions exploitation. And then you can start doing signals intelligence work in those areas. But you must first do a vulnerability analysis, because it may be a complete waste of time and money to do a bug sweep if the premises are not reasonably secure. This is a real problem with clients who engage somebody to do bug sweeps. They don't have any security. They don't have an alarm system, or if they do, it hasn't worked in years, or they have cameras that aren't really properly installed. Now you can have bug sweeps that includes a vulnerability analysis, so that when a bug sweep is performed, you have problems. You get those problems documented in part of the TSCM report. You resolve all those problems. Then you have the same firm come back and do another bug sweep. And they might find a few other minor vulnerabilities, but they're there to do your bug sweep. So when doing bug sweeps, a vulnerability analysis is naturally created. But that vulnerability analysis really should be created well in advance of inviting a bug sweep team to come in. As I've mentioned, it's a waste of money to have any bug sweep service, TSCM services performed, without first having a careful vulnerability analysis or threat assessment completed. So you do the vulnerability analysis first, then you do the TSCM services. If you haven't had a TSCM performed in the past, or you haven't had a threat assessment done in the past, then you can have TSCM and threat assessment done at the same time, but the TSCM services won't be as effective because they're working in an area that is not generally secure, private, or under the control of the owner of the property. The function of a vulnerability analysis is to identify weaknesses in your locks, in your doors, in your alarms, your fence lines, your camera networks, your lights inside and outside, your telephone systems, your networks, your computer security, and everything that's used to provide you some measure of privacy, security, and control over a premises or over a thing. It identifies the weaknesses. It doesn't identify people manipulating those things. It identifies things that are vulnerable to that. So a wise executive will have vulnerability analysis done. If it hasn't been done before, they'll have it done. Then they'll delay the bug sweep for a few weeks, but no more than that. And then they'll have the bug sweep done. Or they'll have both done at the same time because there simply isn't enough time to do a vulnerability analysis because they're having an emergency. They need emergency TSCM services. They don't really have time for to have a vulnerability analysis done first. So we have to play the ball we're thrown, as it's said. So sometimes the vulnerability analysis is a horror show, but we have to push through it and push through the bug sweep because the client is in crisis mode. And when you're in crisis mode, it's not time to have polite meetings about your vulnerabilities. You need to get in there, put your hip waders on, go in, as we say, go in, kill the alligators, and then drain the swamp. You can't just go in and drain the swamp if you haven't killed the alligators first, or at least wrestled the alligators. The end product for vulnerability analysis, or the deliverable, as you will, is going to be a brief written report which talks about specific issues that need to be corrected. In many companies, they prefer for this to be a PowerPoint presentation provided to a group of people in a room. They do not want a written report generated. They do not want a written report which contains photographs in it. The reason for that is in such as a publicly traded company or a very large company, very susceptible to litigation, is they don't want a document trail of everything that's all screwed up. There is a way to get this done which will seal the written report, and the way you do that, it's kind of a secret, but I'll share it with you anyways. You go to corporate counsel or the attorney that represents your company. You tell them, I want a vulnerability analysis done and I want a bug sweep done. They then engage us. So your law firm or your corporate counsel engages us. We work for your attorneys and they direct us. Now, you can attend the meetings and listen and talk and chat, but we work for the attorneys. We give the report to the attorneys, and that document is then sealed. That document is discussed with the client of the attorney, and there's an attorney-client work product privilege. So what we're doing is working under the attorney and creating a legal document for the attorney and for their eyes only. Now, when we discuss this with the attorney, then the attorney's client is usually present so they can hear what we have to say. But we're not doing it for that person. We're doing it for the attorney. And very affluent individuals and very powerful individuals, they never bring somebody in to do a bug sweep or any kind of vulnerability analysis unless it's through corporate counsel or through their attorney. That way they are extremely protected in terms of privacy. Now, the vulnerability analysis will normally include a multi-day RF study called rings and radials. We'll talk about that later. This has to be done to document all the local radio transmitters, all the FM radio stations, all the frequencies used by the taxi companies and the police and so on, so that we have an inventory of what's supposed to be on the airwaves in an extraordinarily deep amount of detail. This part is done from a number, and we'll get into how this is done later, but this is done on a number of moving positions, and it's done on a number of fixed positions, and these are external RF surveys. These are typically done in a covert manner so that people who are on the premises or nearby will have no idea what's going on, and it models the radio frequency environment in detail. And shortly in this video we'll talk about rings and radials, but I also have standalone videos about rings and radials that get into the lovely details of how this little black magic thing is done. Now, a TSCM inspection is often referred to as a limited vulnerability analysis. So it will not be the entire building, it will be just one executive's office. It doesn't need to take very long, but it can take quite a while. Bug sweep equipment is generally not brought into the area because we don't want the spy to see it, but we're going in looking typically with the naked eyes. It's a visual inspection. It's to determine what TSCM assets will be needed, how big are the rooms, how many chairs are there, how many coffee makers are there. A great deal of mundane details are collected, but a bug sweep is not done. Bug sweep equipment is not generally brought into the building, although when the rings and radials surveys are done external to the building, this creates a data package for future bug sweeps. For example, drawing out the rooms, drawing out the doors, documenting what kind of walls they have. Is it sheetrock? Is it wood? Is it metal studs? Is it wooden screw studs? And it documents what will be used as a seed document for a future TSCM project. But it's a visual project. It usually involves rings and radial studies, not inside the building, strictly outside the building, and never so close. Typically, you never get more than 600 feet to a building. Sometimes you can get within 100 feet of a building, but the rings and radials can really trip up the TSCM scheduling if it gets detected. But we have to determine what assets we need to bring on a target. Do we need 25 engineers and 17 trucks, or do we need 2 and 1 station wagon? We also have to determine during a TSCM inspection, how are we going to get the people and equipment in this area to be inspected in a moderately covert manner or in a totally covert manner. But it's tricky to do this. Now, we're also trying to determine the physical security measures required to protect against limited technical penetration and unaided audio leakage. Now, a TSCM inspection is different than a sweep. It generally does not involve test equipment inside the premises. If there's test equipment being used, it's being done on the ring and radial aspect to do an RF inventory to prepare for future TSCM projects. So for all practical purposes, what's needed for a TSCM inspection is a notepad, a flashlight, and a couple of pens. My preference is a couple of black pens. one or two red pens, some pencils, an eraser, Architect's eraser. For a flashlight, I prefer a very strong LED flashlight that is relatively small, easily placed in the pocket, and is rechargeable. For a notepad, I like to use the smaller 5 by 8 inch notepads because they're less obnoxious. However, I also prefer to use regular, what's called an oversized laboratory notebook. So if I do use a smaller notepad, I'm going to take those notepad sheets and tape them into my laboratory notebook. So sometimes it's best just to use the laboratory notebook. In other cases, if we have to cover a great deal of space, I'll use an audio recorder so that I can dictate notes, which helps me prepare my inspection notes. It may or may not involve a ladder. It's desirable for it not to involve a ladder, because as soon as you pop the ladder out, if you have a spy in your office, as soon as they see that ladder, they're going to know something's up. So generally, I don't use a ladder for these. It'll be me just taking a few notes or scribbles. I'm actually looking at a great deal, but I'm trying to just appear that I just have a pen and a notepad, and I could be any of 100 different vendors. It is important when doing this part of a TSCM service, which is the TSCM inspection, that it not involve test equipment except for the rings and radials, which is a whole different creature, and that nobody know what you're doing. You could be there measuring for carpet. I very commonly do carry a tape measure, and I will take tape measurements so that somebody may see it and think I'm just measuring to put some carpets in or to do some painting or something. But we don't want to tip anybody off who's a spy that there is a full TSCM project coming up once this inspection is completed. Let's move on to the next type of inspection service. This is called an in-place monitoring, or IPM. It is the lowest level of legitimate TSCM sweep. Now, I need to draw a delineation between a TSCM sweep and a TSCM inspection. A TSCM sweep is looking for the bugs. A TSCM inspection is getting ready to look for the bugs. So when possible, you do a vulnerability analysis and you do a TSCM inspection before you do your bug sweep. Now, if there's not a lot of access to an area and your duration of concern about an area is relatively small, then instead of having a full bug sweep done, you have an in-place monitoring done. So your bug sweep team, they come in at 4 o'clock in the morning, they set up, they check the area very quickly, very cursory manner, and then they set up their equipment nearby where a sensitive meeting is going to take place, and they set up so that nobody knows they're there, nobody sees them, they don't do anything to tip their hand off that they're merely 30 feet away from the meeting area, or they're just on the other side of the wall. The important part is to examine the electromagnetic spectrum to see if there's any transmitters that are active while the meeting is going on. I've had many cases where a board of directors was having a meeting. I was asked to do an in-place monitoring from 50 feet away, and just before the meeting went live, I picked up wireless microphones, and what they had done is placed, I'm not kidding, they placed a wireless microphone on each of the board members, so they all had their own channel, and then they were mixing that in a complex mixing board, and then playing that over the PA system for the board of directors meeting, and every member of the board said and everything that was had in this meeting. They were transmitting. I did the math and did some practical experiments on it after the fact. Approximately 1,800 feet away, outside of the building, in buildings for other companies, you could actually clearly hear all 24 microphones. Now, because we were brought in to do an in-place monitoring, as soon as those microphones went live, we caught them instantly. And before any of those board members actually said things, because they were having their hair done and getting their clothing ready, and the microphones were clipped on, they were checked, and we caught them as they were preparing to have a massive leak. The company was actually being aggressively solicited by a foreign government who intended to buy the company, fire 1,500 Americans, and then strip the company out of all their intellectual property, move it to China, make everything in China, and then sell it, since they own the trademark, sell those products in the United States with really poor quality materials. They had bugged the boardroom. They had bugged the CEO's office. They'd bugged the treasurer's office. They'd bugged the legal counsel office. And they had got the audio-video guys to use these special microphones. These special microphones were not normally sold in the United States, but were gifted, if you will. And they were on special frequencies, which we picked up those special frequencies right away. They were encoded, super scrambled, impossible to intercept, impossible to decode. Okay, about that, it took us less than 1/3 of a second to descramble and decode and de-encrypt all of the units. There was no actual leak that day. However, us finding a wide variety of problems like this in that particular company caused the board of directors to have some meetings that did not involve the president and CEO, who ended up being replaced, and they brought in some hardcore people. They also found that the CEO was being blackmailed by the Chinese, which means the CEO had to go. They were able to salvage the company and keep it above. They were able to keep their head above water for several years, but the damage had already been done, and all they were able to do was slow down the inevitable death of this great American icon. But the microphones, we did in-place monitoring, and we detected the microphones, cataloged them, documented them, and we were able to intercept them before they had their meeting. We also, at the last minute, moved the meeting to an entirely different location, where we screened all the phones and devices off of the board. And they had their meeting. They had it in extremely good privacy, and there were no leaks. For the first time in 30 years, there were no leaks from the board of directors meeting that year. But there were many more meetings, and we had to have those off-site, as the facility itself had just been, it was a Swiss cheese of bugs and eavesdroppers, people who worked for the company who were actually on a Chinese payroll, and dozens of employees in the executive corridor who were actually Chinese, working on behalf of the Chinese government. So in-place monitoring is very important, especially when you've got a sensitive meeting coming up and you have not had appropriate time to prepare with a full TSCM sweep, inspections, and so on. We also do what's called frequency domain analysis, which is looking for transmissions or electronic energy, electromagnetic energy on the RF spectrum. We're looking at both in terms of what frequency is it. We're looking at it as to what the space is. In other words, where is it coming from? It's called space domain analysis or direction finding. And then, of course, we're interested in the power levels and voltage levels and so forth. But this is a very low, when you roll in with equipment, this is the lowest level of legitimate TSCM sweep. There are things that are much more sophisticated than this that we'll cover later in the same video. Now, we want to monitor while something is in progress. If we have sufficient time and resources to do so, we'll do a ring and radial study for several days in advance prior to doing the in-place monitoring, and we do that as a preparatory step. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we often have to skip this, or we have to do a partial ring and radial study. It's very unwise to skip this step, but to be quite candid, very often it's an emergency. They're having a meeting this afternoon. We've got a team 45 miles away. We can have them there within an hour, and we have 2-hour access to the room before the meeting takes place. Then we have to set up for an IPM for, we don't know how long it might be. It might be a 4-hour meeting, might be a 24-hour meeting. So we set up, we do our thing. If there's a situation that we detect, we'll go into the room, we'll pause the meeting, we'll deal with the situation, like somebody may have just turned a transmitter on an hour into the meeting. We'll deal with that, and we're not going to disclose how we deal with that, but there's a way that we deal with that. And don't skip this. If you need to have an IPM done, budget sufficient money and time to have a rings and radial study performed before the IPM takes place. Now, with an IPM, we have to assume that the facility is secure. We know the facility probably isn't secure, but for what we're doing, we don't have time with an IPM to look at how are their doors, how are their locks, where are their cameras, how does the carpet look, we don't have time for that. We got time to go in, set the equipment up, start monitoring the airwaves, make sure there's nothing live, and then wait to see if something comes live in that meeting. And if we have the time in advance, we'll do the rings and radial study, which you're going to find really interesting when I get a little further down this video. It is a very limited physical inspection, very limited physical or visual inspection, simply because there's just not enough time. If there is enough time, then we may be in a place 5, 6, 7 days before the in-place monitoring is done. We'll do the in-place monitoring for a day, and then afterwards we'll outbrief with our client. We have to assume when this happens that the threat is from the actual meeting attendees, that they carry in tape recorders, wireless phones, cell phones, sometimes video cameras, sometimes some sort of signaling device. Sometimes they're bringing these in, and they know they're bringing these in, and what they're doing is very appalling from a moral perspective. Or sometimes they bring stuff in and they just don't realize it's a problem, like the wireless microphones. Or they bring their cell phones. It's unheard of to bring your cell phone into a board of directors meeting. It's not that the person holding that phone is doing something naughty. It's that if that phone is brought in, somebody outside the room can access that phone and turn the camera on and turn the audio on, or they can monitor the audio live, which is more commonplace. And it's not uncommon to see transcripts from a board of directors meeting that is extremely privileged and extremely sacrosanct. To actually see it out on the dark web before the meeting's even over, because they're publishing the transcripts in real time so that people in the finance community can make some illicit insider trades based on the espionage that takes place, especially with publicly traded companies. Those board of directors meetings are just a gold mine for people who want to manipulate the stock of the company. Now, the amount of formal training needed to do this type of sweep is minimal. It requires very little equipment. It can be done with as little as 2 briefcases carried by one person. It typically takes 5 to 10 days to learn how to operate the equipment. It does not take a great deal of technical background. You do not, for example, have to have a master's degree in electronics engineering, mechanical engineering, and have a semi-truck full of test equipment. Very commonly, those two briefcases only require 5 to 10 days of training. The problem is, if you can only get into a place for a short period of time, it's only appropriate to deploy a couple of briefcases. It's also, if you're bringing in 900 pounds of equipment, that might stand out. And when you're dragging it into a janitorial closet, that might be suspicious and somebody might pay attention. But you can usually smuggle in 2 briefcases. So you don't need much training on 2 briefcases. Typically, what the standard was within the private investigator community is they would show up with 1 briefcase that had their primary piece of equipment in it, 1 briefcase with their laptop, camera, and a hot coffee thermos in it, and one was the admin box, the other was the technical box. They would set it up on a table. Some people only had 2 days training on how to run their $20,000 box. Other people might have 5, 7, 10 days training, but training that exceeded 10 days on a single briefcase-based system, it was uncommon for it to be longer than that. Now, if they bought 3 or 4 different kinds of briefcase systems, they might have 10 days training on each of those. But real bug sweeps, I'll give you a secret here. It takes 2 years of training after you have a technical background. So if somebody earns a bachelor's degree in engineering or a master's degree in electronics engineering, and they go to someplace to get a job like the U.S. government or like Granite Island Group, they're going to go to that entity's school for 2 years. Then they're going to be matched with a team where they apprentice for quite a long time. Only then do they know how to do bug sweeps. Bug sweeping is not taught in colleges. It's not taught at state police academies. When FBI agents become FBI agents, they're not taught anything about how to do a bug sweep. When they need a bug sweep done, they call an outside company like ours, or they'll call somebody who's a technically trained agent, but who doesn't know how to do a bug sweep, doesn't have the equipment to do the bug sweep, and they're scrambled to try to find spectrum analyzers and oscilloscopes and the specialized ones that they need to do the bug sweeps, because they just don't have them. It's really unfortunate. If you want to see some of the horror shows that happens with the FBI, DHS, and so on when they need to have bug sweeps done, there's a 90-minute video. It's unclassified. I produced it. I'll be putting it up probably December, after Thanksgiving. I think that's the release date on it. It will definitely make you very upset with some senior FBI officials and DOJ officials who've been totally asleep at the wheel, and some of the eavesdropping problems the FBI's had because they can't keep their own house clean. But we'll talk about that some other time. Now, a full TSCM survey or TSCM sweep, this is what most people think a bug sweep is. It is a comprehensive electronic, visual, and physical examination of a sensitive facility or sensitive thing by TSCM personnel. It is an engineering service. It's not an investigative service. This is something that engineers and technicians do. They come in, they bring in a huge amount of electronic test equipment. They set up for days and days and days. It's not uncommon for a bug sweep to take 24 days. That's a good bug sweep. Typically, it started with a rings and radial assignment. It may be done with vulnerability analysis or with a TSCM inspection to determine what's needed. But just before the bug sweep, they'll do a ring and radial study again to compare what changed from when they were out 6, 8 months 2 years prior and today. It takes a lot less time, but they still have to cover the same number of miles. It is done to assert that an area is free of technical penetrations and detect technical security hazards and weaknesses. The end result is a report which lists the findings of: we found a wireless transmitter at 398.605 megahertz transmitting with a narrow FM frequency to a listening post located 175 feet to the southeast. Inside that listening post were found, and you go over what the findings were, or you say, while doing this sweep, we noticed that the mag locks on the door going out to the loading dock has been neutralized and has been rendered deliberately in a fashion that does not work. The lock that goes out into the door has been jammed and the latch does not work, so you can open the door, and the cameras have had white paint spray on the lens, so the cameras aren't going to. So we go through the whole situation of, has somebody tampered with the technical security here? Have they tampered and created a weakness? Is the weakness being exploited? But our primary emphasis is always looking for the bugs and the wiretaps and the hostily induced technical penetrations. So this is what most people consider to be a bug sweep. This is a table that I've turned upside down, and I have found a bug in one of the table legs. What you're looking at on the left side is a table leg that's been milled out, and a circular bug has been placed in a pocket that was created for the purposes of illicit bugging. On the right side of this picture is a table leg from the same table that has not been modified. If we look on the left-hand side, we can see the circle and we can see the wire from the antenna. This is typically what is seen with professionally installed bugs. This is the facility where this was found. This was discovered to actually be an employee there who had done it. The employee was no longer working for the company shortly after this was discovered. But this is one of the offices there. So this is a bug that has been concealed in something. In this particular case, this is a coffee table that the legs had been removed. As you can see, the legs bolt into place. They had removed one of the legs, hollowed out the end that goes against the table, made a couple little air holes, put it all back together, screwed it back to the bottom of the table. And this is typically what you're going to have in many executive offices all across the United States. Somebody's modified their furniture. They didn't tape a bug under something, or maybe they did. How do you know? Call us. We can tell you. Now, these are commonly performed for attorneys, paralegals, lawyers, law firms, executives. They're extremely big with corporate boardrooms, investment bankers, stockbrokers, anybody who's working with sensitive information that other people want, or which a little bit of correct information in advance of something could make somebody an overnight billionaire. So these buggings typically are by financial predators or psychological predators, and the victims are the law firms, the attorneys, the executives, the board members in the corporate boardroom, the investment bankers. Keep in mind, if you work with sensitive information, you're going to be targeted by a spy. These are also commonly performed at military bases, embassies, at defense contractors, Department of Energy facilities, and every facility operated from the Treasury to the Pentagon. has to have bug sweeps done, and all areas used to store or process classified information, especially if that classified information is on a computer or in an audio format or a room where classified information is being performed. And in the United States, there's over 250,000 specific areas that are targeted, and they all have to be checked on a regular basis. Now, how regular is not something that is appropriate to discuss in an unclassified presentation, but there is a schedule. There is a way to determine when a place needs to be done, how it needs to be done. The biggest problem we have in the United States is the sweep operations nationwide run by the federal government are grossly undermanned. Think about that for a minute. Grossly undermanned. So, if you want to learn how to do bug sweeps, you want to go work for the U.S. government, I applaud your efforts, and I would recommend start with 6 years in the military on active duty, get your bachelor's degree, get your master's degree, and then let it be known that you're available to go to school. And then go to the CIA, attend their school, and then go back to the military after you've done some few years with the CIA. Now, a full TSCM survey and sweep is an extremely equipment-intensive project. It requires hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of equipment for just one sweep at one location, involving hundreds, if you're lucky, just hundreds, but usually thousands of pounds of gear. And it can be, it's not uncommon to move 15,000 pounds of equipment in the morning and move it out and replace that with another 15,000 pounds of equipment, or bring in 4 shipments of equipment over 4 days, so that at the end of 4 days you've brought 60,000 pounds of equipment into a building where you sit there and use it for 24 days, and then bring all of that equipment back out, put it in trucks, and leave. It is an extraordinarily equipment-intensive undergoing. It's significant manpower requirements. However, in many cases, the company, the executive, the client, they don't want more than 1 or 2 people coming in, because they can't explain why they need 36 people all working on the air conditioner at a time. So the smaller the team, the better. But those people have to be very effective and very well trained and very well equipped, because while they may need 12 people to do the project, they may only be able to get 2 people in there to do it. So 2 people have to do the work of a much larger team. But it's significant manpower requirements. One small executive office, not a suite of offices, one room, typically requires 4 to 10 man days, which means if you've got one person in there, it's going to take them 4 to 10 days to do it. If you've got 4 people, it's going to take them 1 to 2 days, maybe 2.5 days. But the more people you bring in, the more the eavesdropper is going to catch onto what you're doing, and we don't want that to happen. Now, there's a lot of all-over-the-counter equipment which is used for a TSCM survey, but there's also a great deal of very special equipment that is designed to look for covert devices transmitting over the airwaves, and we have to look at all light waves entering or leaving an area, because there's a number of ways that light can be modulated in the visible spectrum, in the infrared spectrum, and in other spectrums, and data and audio conversations, and even data from a computer itself can be transmitted out of an area on the RF airwaves or through the visual airwaves. And it's not that difficult to do, actually. And there's all kinds of fun stuff the CIA and NSA have come up with that transmits data from a computer screen, and it gives you, literally, you can access the hard drives through the computer screen itself and through the infrared port, and you never have to actually get close to the computer to do it. So we have to use special equipment to search the airwaves and special equipment to check all the light frequencies of everything entering and everything leaving, no matter what it is. Now, while we're doing a full TSCM survey, we're going to look at every wire and every conductor in a given area. We're going to check it in detail for any kind of covert listening devices, for any kind of video devices, for any type of a bridge or a tap or an interface or anything that's there that should not be there. And it's quite frightening, the things that we find after a U.S. government team has gone through and done a bug sweep and ensured that there's absolutely no problem at all. And we get called to do a sweep after they've done a sweep. It's usually a horror show because most U.S. government sweep teams miss an astronomical percentage of what's there. They actually miss 80 to 85% of everything that's there. And even a place that's had 5 or 6 bug sweeps done in recent history, they still won't find the majority of the stuff that's up in the ceiling and in the walls. And they'll have 10,000 excuses why they didn't find it. And there'll be all kinds of investigations. And ultimately, a lot of finger pointing is done, but they didn't find it, and we did. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Now, a full RF search is typically done first. Once the RF search is done or well underway, then a wire and conductor check is done. And once those things are done, then a detailed physical search takes place. And it is one of the most amazing things to see, is a detailed physical search taking place. Because the detailed physical search doesn't really use much equipment. The equipment that is used I'm not going to discuss, but it's impressive. The RF search is really cool, and if you're a spectrum analyzer nerd or a signals intelligence geek, you're going to absolutely geek out on the RF search. If you're a telephone guy, or you're a telephone nerd, or you really you eat, sleep, and dream about phone wires, you're going to love the wire and conductor check. It's boring, but it's awesome if that's what you're into. But the detailed physical search just absolutely blows people's minds when they see us do it. And it often blows their minds what we find that nobody else found. Now, the amount of time to do TSCM training for this type of project is actually fairly extensive. Generally, if somebody already has a technical background, such as a bachelor's or a master's degree in electronics engineering or mechanical engineering or computer engineering, or they served 5 or 6 years, typically 6, in the active duty military working on mainframe computers in a classified environment, that's awesome. But then they also need about 5,000 hours of TSCM specific training on top of that. So imagine going to school, you get your bachelor's degree in electronics engineering, you get your master's degree in electronics engineering, and then some East Coast company offers to pay you an obscene amount of money in a salary with a extraordinarily benevolent weekly bonus paycheck. And as soon as you get hired and onboarded, they send you to 5,000 classroom hours where you spend several years in a classroom. As you get better and better, they start taking you out of the classroom where you go out to hotel rooms where they have set up training scenarios, or you go out to offices where they've set up training scenarios, but you don't know where these are going to be because they don't want you to know anything about it. But 5,000 hours of technical training, then they put you out in the field to start your internships. That's how much training is actually required to legitimately do a bug sweep and be able to honestly say that something is there or not there. It is thousands of hours of training over and above. Even people who have gone to U.S. government schools and learned to do bug sweeps, they too have to go through these 5,000 hours of classroom. And what they learn in class directly contradicts what they were taught at the Little Red Schoolhouse. But that's okay. You don't, when you go to Fort Washington, you don't really learn to do bug sweeps. You learn to pencil whip reports. When you go to a private company, and that company puts you through several years of school, you learn to do bug sweeps, and you will find way more bugs than any of the government training that you've gotten. Now, full TSCM surveys and sweeps, they require an expert level of knowledge in several areas, in several disciplines. Of course, security, that should be obvious. You have to have an expert level of knowledge in electronics, which is to say radio communication circuits, how resistors and capacitors and inductors and transistors all work, integrated circuits. You need to be able to design stuff. You need to understand electronics well enough that you can design stuff. Lots of stuff. All kinds of stuff. Stuff with microphones, stuff with buffers, stuff with amplifiers. If you can't spit out the design for a primitive radio transmitter, you don't have the necessary electronics background. Also, just because you have a ham radio license doesn't mean you know anything about electronics. It's a hobby. That's what it is. Now, there's a lot of engineers who are also ham radio guys, and that's cool. But if you're just a ham radio guy and that's all your technical training, don't get involved in doing bug sweeps. There's a number of companies over the years who the owner's sole technical qualification was he had a ham radio license, and not much one of that. And so everything that they did for bug sweeps completely evolved out of their ham radio hobby. And when they got into a tight spot, they just completely fell apart because they could not explain what was going on. You also have to have an expert level of knowledge in communications. I'm not saying that as a journalism sort of communications. I'm referring to radio communications, telephone communications, computer communications, satellite communications. If you can't work on those systems, maintaining them or designing them or installing them, or have thousands of hours of training in communication systems on top of a technical degree, don't try to do bug sweeps. With modern technology, you also need to have a degree or multiple degrees or related training in computer science. Best way to get that is go to a college, get a 4 or 6 year degree in computer science or computer forensics or something along those lines. So you have to have security training, electronics training, communications training, computer science training, and you need to have an even blend of all of that. Because if you're just a ham radio guy and you got tens of thousands of dollars of equipment, you don't know anything about how to do a bug sweep, and you're ripping your customers off. I'm sorry to have to tell you that. Leave this to the professionals. This involves thousands of hours of formal training. Thousands of hours of formal training. So that's what you're going to need to get. If you're hiring people to do bug sweeps, you need to make sure that they have thousands of hours of formal training. You need to make sure they have an electronics background. You need to make sure they have a communications background. You need to make sure they have a computer science background. The security background is very easy to fake. Very easy to fake. The electronics is extremely hard to fake unless you're a ham radio guy, in which case it's easy to fake. The communication side is very, very difficult to fake. The computer science side is, well, it's a special kind of problem child, because most computer security experts, they have a dabbling in computer science, but they don't really know what they're doing. But that's okay. Don't tell them. They have an inferiority complex as it is. So in-place monitoring and TSCM, which is called IPM Plus, is one of the most common types of inspections. It involves a full survey and sweep prior to an event. Then during an event, such as a board of directors meeting, there's in-place monitoring during the event. So with a proper amount of planning, 3-4 weeks of time is spent performing a bug sweep, where the board of directors will be meeting, the C-suite, the CEO's office, the president's office, the head of finance, the head of accounting, the legal department. Everybody who's got a wooden desk is what we call it. A wooden desk and a mahogany row, they get a bug sweep of their offices and sometimes of their homes. On rare occasions, also their automobiles. Then during the board of directors meeting, or just before the annual meeting, or right after the annual meeting, we'll set up for an in-place monitoring during the event, where we're trying to catch somebody knowingly or unwittingly transmitting that extremely sensitive event, because there are actually companies who make their money by having boardrooms bugged, and they get the information from the boardroom, and then they use that to do shorts and puts and options trading based on that insider information. And it's very unlikely that the SEC will ever be able to prove that they did it. It's just that they just happen to make the trade for exact dates, exact times, and the only place those exact dates and exact times were talked about were inside the board of directors, the boardroom. So now let's talk about a different animal. And this animal I would mention is an unclassified discussion. So nothing in here is classified, although some of it may make your hackles go up, and you'll be speed dialing the duty officer to file complaints about this content. But this information is unclassified. And I'm the original author of all of it. None of it is taken from any government documents or classified materials or classified manuals, and most of it is actually based on merely the laws of physics, and me having taken many hundreds of hours of electronics training over the decades. So rings and radials, this is referred to as rings, radials, and pins, and we'll get to the pins momentarily. This is done in the initial stage of a bug sweep. Very often it has to be skipped because there's just not enough time budgeted in the project, where we're not given sufficient time to be able to do this. It is an external RF survey. It is covert in nature. Its primary function is to allow the sweep team to be more effective once they're inside the building or location to be inspected. And I'm going to explain what this all means. There's a lot of TSCM people that they've never heard this phrase before. They sort of have an idea how it's done, but I'm going to reveal some better details and a better way that they can do it. I do have a standalone video that talks about this, which gives examples and shows maps and actual application out in the field, which you will find on this channel. It's already been published. It just hasn't been released yet, and I'm not going to move any of the release dates forward. They'll just spit new video out every few days or every couple of weeks for like the next year. Now, rings and radials, these are done with a vehicle that is in motion. The rings are concentric rings at varying distances away from the target. Now, when you do these for military facilities, you have to go significantly longer distances. and you always start as far away as you possibly can. For a civilian target, you typically will start 30 miles away. So you'll plant a ring that is more or less 30 miles where you can maintain or you can sustain a fixed speed for hours at a time. And these take days to do. So there'll be a run ring at 30 miles, sometimes 35. Then there'll be one set at 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, 3, and 1 mile, respectively. It's vitally important not to approach the target too close when you're doing this, lest somebody go, wait, that van, that looks way out of, what are they, hold on a minute, something fishy's going on here. Now, when you do this for military facilities, you add to that a 45-mile ring, a 60-mile ring, a 75-mile ring, and a 90-mile ring. And if you're way, way, way out in the middle of the desert, and you're miles away from the nearest paved surface or any signs of humanity, you might actually have to open it up even further away than 90 miles. But usually 90 miles will satiate the requirements, the technical requirements that we're looking for. I'm not going to get into exactly why we're doing it this way. I'll let that be a little mystery. But by doing these concentric circles and these laterals, you can really, really get an unfair advantage against the spy. And the people who really hate it that we do this is the spy, because we can catch them without them knowing they've been caught. So the radials are different than the rings. Radials are tangential lines that are a distance from the target. So, for example, we would start a little over 30 miles to the south of the target, and we would drive straight or semi-straight towards the target, passing the target, and then we would continue 30 plus miles to the north of the target. So we've moved 60 miles in total. We would then turn the vehicle around and then go from the north back down to the south. Once that's done, we would increment 15 to 30 degrees and repeat. So we quite literally are running in straight lines to and from and to and from, and then ratchet over and do it again. But we have to come at the target from multiple angles. This is utterly exhausting, but it's got to be done. Now, you don't do these and then stop and make measurements. It's vitally important that you only regard the measurements while you're moving. So if you got stop at a stoplight, you need to pause the measurements. Actually, what will happen is the computer which controls this will go, we've stopped, mark that, so that all the measurements they know were done from a fixed position as opposed to you moving. But moving is vital. You'll notice that I talk about a 30 mile, 25 mile, 20 mile, 15 mile. Well, these are the crossover points of all of the rings. Now, if we can, we want our radials to get within a half mile to a quarter mile, what we call close proximity. But we want to make every possible effort not to get too close. And these are, ideally, we want the vehicle moving at 35 miles an hour or faster. In the Boston area, for example, we will do these at like Route 2, Route 1. Route 128 would be a ring. In many cases, it would be a radial. So doing the rings and radials are absolutely vital. If we were doing a project at a military facility or an Intel site, Department of Energy or NASA, something like that, we would actually start our radials at 90 miles away from the target, drive towards the target, pass through or near the target, and then continue whatever that distance was going in the opposite direction. but we have to get these from multiple angles. And what we're trying to do is inventory everything that's on the airwaves. And as we get closer to the target, the more important all those signals become. But we don't just look for bugs. We look for everything. Things we know what they are, things we don't know what they are. Could be some spread spectrum, something. It could be a covert satellite that's bouncing off of something. It could be radar from a satellite. It could be any of a million different things, but it's all sucked up and it's all put into a database, and it all presents a three-dimensional view of everything that's on the airwaves for 90 miles in every direction in some case. With corporate work, 30 miles in every direction is usually sufficient. Now, once the rings and radials are done, we do what is called the pins, and there's 2 rounds of pins. So a pin is a fixed location. So once your rings and radials are completed, you set up for, and these are fixed locations where you're not driving at 30 miles an hour, you're driving at 0. These locations are very carefully picked out. They will be in a spiral formation. You don't want to get too close, because if you get too close, the spy's going to pick up on what you're doing. Now, if you understand how a spiral is mathematically formed, that mathematic form is what we use to establish first standard range, and these will be multiple locations over 30 miles, 30, 25, 20, 15, and 10 miles out. That's our standard ranges. Our intermediate ranges are the points at 5, 3, 2, 1.5, 1.25 mile. The 1.25 mile is actually extremely important, especially when you're dealing with bugs that are targeting classified materials, because certain agencies will never put their listening post within 1.25 miles, but they'll get it real close to that line. They'll be 1.26 miles, 1.27 miles. And when you're doing the pins and you're doing the rings and radials, you're also listening to see if you can find listening posts without them knowing that they've been caught. Now, when you get under 5,000 feet, things get a little scary, for lack of any other word. It's very easy, if you fumble this, that you're going to blow the security of the bug sweep. So you do this at 5,000 feet, 2,500 feet, 1,200 feet, 750 feet, 600 feet. Now, those are called the near range, because those are typically the distances where a eavesdropping listening post is established. 600 feet is the go-to for mini spies. A lot of the FBI use the 600 feet and a 1.25 mile rule. It's a stupid rule. They shouldn't be getting that close, but they do, because they've got inferior equipment and they've got shabby training, but that's what they got. Spies for certain countries, they're real big on a 1.25 mile. They think it's some sort of a holy grail that if they put their listening post a 1.25 miles away from their target, that they're not going to get caught. Trust me, they do, and they do often. But if the listening post is within 600 feet, we've discovered the bug as well as the listening post, and we routinely find eavesdroppers at 1,200 feet. So there's actually 2 types of pins. There's the 7 pins that we talked about in the previous screen. Now let's talk about the spiral 5 pins. Sometimes 9 pins or more are used for these. These are exterior but close to the area to be inspected. Now, when we start getting this close, it becomes a very dangerous game, because the slightest little misstep by us or by the spy is going to reveal what's going on. So once you get 400, 300, 200, 150 feet, 100 feet, 80 feet, Those are called close ranges. Proximity ranges are 60 feet and less. You can get 25 feet away from where a bugging device is and still be invisible to the spy. You just have to really have good tradecraft and be able to move around and pretend like you're nothing more than a janitor or something. But you can get very close to the spy. I've been involved in projects where the espionage listening post was 100 feet away from a top secret facility, and it was in operation when it was caught, and the spies were very surprised when base security came on them after they were eavesdropping for quite some time on collecting top secret information. Actually, they were targeting encryption equipment and are listening in on top secret telephone calls from 100, just I think it was 102 feet and 3 inches, and it was a Russian intelligence service. Those spies are now long since dead. They were caught red-handed on a military base. They were flipped to become reverse spies. So while they were working for us, they were feeding lies to their Russian superiors, and the Russians ended up figuring out what was going on and executing them, but we did manage to actually catch them at just a hair over 100 feet, sucking information out of top secret encryption equipment. Now, we call this homework. That's euphemistically. It's a great deal of work that's done long before we do the sweep. It's often done months, in some cases years. Sometimes it's done 5 years before a sweep. And then each year we go in and we redo it and we update everything. Now, one of the side benefits is if this is done right, it will detect active bugs before we get on a property. Let me back up there a minute. We can detect active bugs long before we get on the property. So if there's a couple of video cameras in somebody's home, we can detect them before we come in their driveway. We're detecting these bugs in their home 1,000 feet away. So this homework allows us to detect bugs from a considerable distance, so that once we go on the premises, we don't have to spend as much time there, and the time that we spend there, we're working with very, very sharp tools. That being the data that we've collected. Now, once the exterior rings, radials, and pins are completed, the project is safe to move inside the premises to be inspected. Once inside the building, a very careful version of rings is slowly approached in the areas of greatest interest. And the key thing here is it's inside the building, but it has to be extremely carefully choreographed and, of course, very carefully hidden from a series of fixed positions inside the premises that's being examined. The goal is to very slowly approach the bugging or leaking device in a controlled manner. You don't want to go thundering into what's called the sound stage and go, aha, because you've just totally screwed everything up. The aha moment is when you catch the human spies, not their toys. You find the bugs in secret, then you find the spies if you can, but you neutralize the devices or you do other things. We talk about that in other videos as to all the really cool things you can do to a bug to use the bug to your advantage and to the demise of your opponent. Now, one type of TSCM service is the TSCM survey done for a protective detail. Now, a protective detail is a euphemism for bodyguard. So if you're the President of the United States You have a number of bodyguards that follow you around everywhere you go. You have Secret Service bodyguards. You have Marine Corps bodyguards. You have Air Force bodyguards. You have Army bodyguards. You have everywhere you go, you have to be surrounded with hundreds of bodyguards. Some of those are Secret Service. Most of them are not. And you have to have bug sweeps done everywhere you go. In fact, you should probably have bug sweeps done everywhere your family members goes, because I'll give you an example. There's a president of the United States called President Biden. He had two sons. Both sons had severe problems with substance abuse. And well, one of his sons, he tells everybody he had brain cancer and died. He was actually a junkie and he overdosed. And it's very unfortunate that his one son died of a drug overdose and that it was not really covered up. They didn't do a very good job of covering it up, but that's his true cause of death. And so his other son decides to also be a drug addict and alcoholic and pedophile and a few other unkind things. And his son videotaped what he was doing, some type of a trophy hunting, I guess, where he would hire prostitutes and do things to prostitutes that people do to prostitutes, and he would videotape the whole thing. So he was self-snitching, and there's some awesome channels, like Bruce Rivers' channel I strongly recommend. He's an attorney who talks about self-snitching. There's also a number of other channels that talk about self-snitching and why people really screw their lives up by video and audio recording themselves doing things that they should not be doing, and then doing stupid things like writing books about how bad they were and how a bad alcoholic and a bad junkie, and he's not going to die like his brother did. He knows what he's doing. Yeah, you know what? It's just a matter of time until Hunter Biden shows up with a drug overdose, or he dies of cirrhosis of the liver because of what he's done. Unfortunately, his father's the president, and he's a major liability for his father. And it's an exceptionally sad situation. Now, there have been other presidential children of the president, or spouse of the president, or girlfriend of the president, who couldn't keep a secret, and no matter what the Secret Service did, they couldn't do anything at all to shut that person up or shut them down. So, very powerful people and people with a great deal of resources need to have a protective detail TSCM survey done. It's only done for high-threat situations. If you're some rich guy who just wants to look important and you hire bodyguards and strippers to make you look better, you don't need to have bug sweeps done. You're just playing mind games. But if you're a head of state or a diplomat or somebody who works in the entertainment community or an actor or actress or corporate executives, or you're an ultra-high wealth individual, you need to have a protective detail, hopefully before you have an incident, but you need a protective detail for yourself. You need one for your family, and that needs to include a TSCM survey program. Now, when the Secret Service goes someplace, the president goes someplace, he brings his, they call them the muzzled Secret Service attack dogs. Sometimes they are helpful, sometimes they're not, but their job is to protect the president, the vice president, the president's family, heads of state that are meeting with the president, and a wide variety. And they do a fairly good job, but they do a horrible, absolutely horrible job when it comes to everything associated with TSCM. It's just a horror show. So if you're an executive and you're going to be visiting a place and you send your protective detail team there, they need to either hook up with a TSCM guy when they get there, or they need to ship that guy in from someplace else with thousands of pounds of equipment so that they can bug sweep the ever-living daylights out of every place where the executive is, or the president or the VIP is going to be visiting, and make sure it's free or relatively free of bugging devices, video cameras. If they know a president's going to be staying in a certain suite, they may take a fire alarm sensor down and hide a very small video camera in it, or in the masonry of the fireplace they'll install a video camera, or they'll install microphones into the floor from underneath. This happens all the time. This has happened quite literally in the history of the United States. This has happened hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of times. The threat to the president is not just people using violence against the president. It's people using technical penetrations to damage the politics and the political power, not just of the president, but also of the United States. So if the Chinese can pick up on Hunter Biden soliciting prostitutes, that can be used to blackmail the president. That's a huge problem. And Hunter Biden doesn't have an addiction problem. He has a behavioral problem. He's going to end up just like his brother, because he's a junkie and he's going to overdose and die. And that's unfortunate, but that's the ugly reality. And, oh, by the way, the Secret Service, they have to carry Narcan every time they're around Hunter, because they're expecting him to drop dead of a drug overdose at any given moment. It's really tragic. But let's get back to the technical stuff. All right. So in addition to, with the protective detail, in addition to a full inspection, a protective detail TSCM team will also carry X-ray equipment, so they can X-ray packages, walls, lamps, furniture, cushions, and so on. Now, there are some technologies that allow us to do the same thing without using X-ray radiation. Those newer techniques are preferred because X-ray radiation is very detectable by the spy, and it's very difficult to safely X-ray things unless you have some isolation and stand-back areas. And very often you don't have the time to do that. So X-raying is done. Well, I know somebody who worked for the U.S. Secret Service, and his job was an X-ray technician. And due to him being rushed through his work, he was very rarely allowed to set up the shielding that he needed. And very often he would just prop the plate. And anybody who's worked with X-ray equipment knows just how unfortunate this is. He would prop the plate up on the side of his ankle, and then he'd reach over and he'd pop the X-ray generator, and zip. Then they would develop the film, and you could see everything that they were trying to get the photograph of. The problem is, after him doing this for 20 years, the bones in his ankle, his foot, and his lower leg softened to almost jello-like consistency, and then had to be amputated because the bones turned gangrenous. He got bone cancer from X-ray radiation. They amputated a toe, then a couple of toes, then a few months later, bones of the foot, then the ankle, most of the lower leg, and they ended up taking his leg, every bit of his leg, starting just above the knee all the way down. And then they had to start hacking away on the leg and foot and toe on the other side. And after over 60 surgeries, he had nothing left of his legs or of his pelvis, because it had gotten so bad, and he died with no pelvis because he had to have it all cut away. And it's because he was a Secret Service agent who was not pushing back on safety protocols. So when you're told to do something that's dangerous, and you know it's dangerous, and you know you're not supposed to be doing it that way, but you do it anyways, and you hurt yourself. I visited him multiple times in the hospital. He was proud of what he'd done. He's proud of the service he did for his country. He died because he was in service of his country, but if he had used the industry standard protocols for using X-rays, he wouldn't have had to have his legs, feet, kneecaps, and very slowly they sliced away or hacked away pieces of his body until he had nothing left mid-back down. They stopped at his kidneys. And so he spent the last few years of his life in pain in a hospital bed, screaming for pain meds and anti-anxiety meds. And it was a hallucination when he died. For 6 months, he was hallucinating, and he had a very, I would refer to it as a very bad death. And a very bad death like that is a horror for a true warrior, and this man was a true warrior. He was a Marine with combat experience, and he died in a pool of his own feces because he wasn't doing... The only thing wrong with him is his x-ray poisoning, which was all self-administered. So if you're on a protective detail, please observe safety protocols when using x-ray equipment. It doesn't matter if you're x-raying bombs, suitcases, lamps, cushions, furniture. Use safety protocols and use some of the alternative methods of envisioning through things. Also know where you can use a CAT scan, because there are some commercial CAT scans that you can get and bring. There are even CAT scan machines built into Prevost motorhomes. So you just bring the sofa, you put it on a CAT scan machine, you run it through the CAT scan machine, and you bring it back in the building. Or, if you think the cat has a bug in it, you can run the cat through the CAT scan machine, because, I think that's what they're originally built for. Now, a protective details survey is looking for more than just bugs. A protective detail TSCM survey is looking for more than just bugs. Yes, I just repeated myself, and it tends to indicate when I do that something very important is here. When you're doing a TSCM survey, you're looking for explosives, bombs, poisons, chemical weapons, safety hazards, biological hazards, any other kind of safety issue. And I'll go into this in the next screen. But it also involves making sure that under safety hazards, we have biological hazards. So, for example, when your protectee goes into a very fancy hotel suite, the beds all look nice, the floor looks nice, the bathroom looks nice. Get your black light out and light up that floor and see if that floor has biological materials on it. If it does, you better get that steam cleaned up off that carpet. Check the sheets, take the pillows out of the pillowcases, see if they have biological fluids. I'm not going to go into detail as to what biological fluids and substances you're looking for. Use your imagination and think about when you were 2 years old. Okay? So, you also have to check around the toilets. You have to check, most executives, they have a telephone in the bathroom. Well, why don't you check that thing for bacteria? Because you're going to bring bacteria analyzers with you, and you're just going to be absolutely shocked at how badly loaded that telephone is. The remote control for the TV, same thing. So document it, bring it to the attention of management, demand that they bring in a brand new one that you check and then hook back up. Check the telephones, check the light switches. You're looking for a variety of biological things left over by other people. If somebody's paying $3,500 a night for a king-size bed, you need to make sure that they're getting something worthy of $3,500. And in most cases, executives in the fancy suites will actually demand that a bed be brought in still in the wrappings from the factory, because they don't want to sleep on a bed that somebody else has slept on before. And from a biological perspective, that's actually not a bad idea. And they'll have their bodyguards bring their sheets from home, their bathrobe, their towels, their washcloth, their soap, because they're not going to use the trash the hotel has. And it's rather startling what you find on in the laundry of a hotel. Now, we're not just looking for bugging devices, as I've said before, but we're also looking for anything that could cause that protectee harm or embarrassment of any kind. I will give you an example. A devoutly religious minister checks into a hotel room, and his group goes to his room, and then he and the other ministers and the protective detail who's with those ministers, they search every single room. They check under the mattresses, around the mattresses, under the beds. They make sure there's no used condoms in the bed or around the bed or condom wrappers. They make sure there's no porn anywhere to be found. They'll unplug the TV or turn the TV off and lock it so it can't be used, so that nobody can say that he did anything. And then they'll go to each other's rooms, and as a group, they have what's referred to as a method of having mutual accountability to each other, but also making sure that they're never left alone in a room with somebody of the opposite gender who is not their spouse. You might know the minister I'm speaking of, or the convention that I'm speaking of. So there are a group of ministers who travel around the world, and due to embarrassments that other ministers have suffered in other countries, or even in our own country, they've developed a system where they always move in groups. When it's time to go eat, they go eat as a group. When it's time to check in our hotel rooms, they each go into everybody goes into everybody else's hotel room to make sure there's no monkey business going on, and that Reverend so-and-so is walking into a hotel room and there's a girl hiding under the bed waiting to do mischief, or it could be opposite gender. So these are things which a protective detail TSCM team has to always keep in mind, that mischief may be in foot to try to harm or embarrass your protectee, especially when your protectee is traveling overseas or traveling during times of turmoil. Now, the formal training needed to do a protective detail TSCM survey is extensive. It is literally years long, and that's just the TSCM side. Before you start doing it, you have to have an extremely high level of technical expertise before you learn how to do TSCM. Now, in order to be on one of these teams or provide these sorts of services, the person providing the TSCM service must also be trained in executive and dignitary protection. It doesn't mean that they're a bodyguard, but it means they can talk with bodyguards and everybody understands them. The bodyguard team understands that they're the technical nerds, but they're also skilled with bodyguards. They're good with their hands. They're good with their vehicles. They know their chemical weapons inside out. If there has to be violence, they know that this team member can use violence, but they prefer not to. Their job is to use nonviolent means to protect the protectee. But if it's time, it's time. And they can be depended on to help extricate the person you're trying to protect. These guys are gold. If you hire one for your team, they're going to cost roughly 4 to 5 times more than somebody's not trained in this team. So if you are a bodyguard and been in EP for a while and you want to radically increase how much you're being paid, learn TSCM. But first, take some math classes, take your physics classes, take your organic, your inorganic chemistry classes, take entry to engineering, take your physics, your dynamics, take your calculus 1, 2, 3, 4, take college physics 1 and 2, take a whole bunch of electrical courses, electronics courses. You'll need about 48 credits of just EE level courses. And then I'd say 32 or so of mechanical engineering courses on top of everything else. Then you can get your bachelor's degree or master's degree. Then you can go to school to start to learn TSCM, and 2 years later be reassigned to your protective detail team as an apprentice TSCM person. And you will be happy, your client will be happy, you'll still do EP work when necessary, but you're not going to be walking people to you're not going to be walking your protectee, you're not going to go to the mall with your protectee, you're going to be more bound in the home or attached to the aircraft or the hotel or something like that. And when the protectee is not on the premises, you're going through everything with spectrum analyzers and search receivers, and you just constantly, you never stop looking for something popping up. And it's a really cool position. There are some multi-billionaires who employ 50, 60, there's some of them employ 90, a couple of them actually employ over 500 TSCM people in their bodyguard complement. These are very big executive protection teams, and they've been burned a number of times in the past. So they have people within their teams who they look and act just like bodyguards, but they're engineers, and their job is not to pull guns and protect the protectee. Actually, that's not the job of a bodyguard anyways. If a bodyguard has to pull his firearm, he's not done his job right. So it's to avoid trouble, not fight your way out of it. But if you're in, some backwater areas of Brazil or Venezuela or Chile on a business trip, there's going to be a kidnapping attempt, and sometimes you can't evade the kidnapping attempt because they've gone to tremendous effort to trap your protectee. So you got to fight your way out. And if you got a TSCM guy who's also certified as a bodyguard and has been through all kinds of training, they can fight their way out, and they can help you fight your way out. But they're better with a spectrum analyzer, search receivers, diode detectors, x-ray equipment, with safety caveats, of course. They know nonlinear junction detectors, they know spectrum analyzers, they know specialized receivers, specialized antennas, they know all the technical stuff, but it takes thousands of hours. It actually takes thousands of hours to train a good bodyguard when you look at everything they need to learn, and it takes thousands of hours on top of formal technical training to learn to be a good TSCM person. Now, to do bug sweeps on a protective detail, you have to use equipment that you would not normally use on a regular bug sweep. Here's the deal. The equipment has to be very small. It has to be very specific to what you're doing. And I don't mean specific to TSCM. I mean specific to protective detail TSCM. And then you have to have some other specialized equipment, but it's got to be small. It has to be multiple things have to be integrated into a single box. You can't go rolling in with 1,200 pounds of equipment. You can go rolling in with a luggage cart, like a hotel luggage cart full of equipment, but you can't go in with much more than that because it's going to. Oh, and you can't have suitcases that match. So you have to have a array of suitcases and cases and carrying systems so that it doesn't look like you're rolling in with a whole bunch of fancy silver briefcases, which screams bug sweep. You can have a couple of those, a couple of black cases, some gray cases, maybe some fabric type of suitcases and luggage, but you want to get in there without anybody knowing what you're preparing to go do. So let's move on into other types of services. So there's what's called TSCM pre-construction assistance. This is where you're going to build a building. That's awesome. And you got an architect, and your architect designs this beautiful edifice that will have your name on it and will still be there 150 years after you're dead. Awesome. That's when you want to get your TSCM experts involved, because they're going to go through that building on paper, and specify walls that need to be a little bit thicker than normal. So instead of putting one layer of sheetrock on that wall, you put 2 layers on. Instead of putting the sheetrock directly against the screw studs, there's sheets of steel that's mounted and welded to create a cage around a room, and then you put the sheetrock on both sides of it. Or my preference is to put steel on the outside and copper on the inside, because I can actually do something pretty cool with 2 different surfaces and developing some currents that I can use to disrupt certain types of eavesdropping devices. They're also going to comment on what kind of ceiling tiles, if you use ceiling tiles, or if you use a hard ceiling, the type of lighting that you use, the spacing of the light sconces and the light fixtures, the number of hinges on the door. And the number of hinges on a door can actually be very helpful to protect an area where the switches are for the doors, where the switches are in the hinges, where movement sensors are placed, because you never want movement inside a controlled area that you've not picked up on multiple switches, multiple cameras, and multiple heat sensors. Also, the glazing on the glass is going to be very important. A lot of people, they spend astronomical amounts of money making sure they have bomb-proof glass. Okay, well, if you've got money to burn, that's fine, but that's not your first priority, especially when it's dealing with TSCM. TSCM person can hook you up with the kind of glass that you're looking for, or they may tell you that don't set your office up on a window. Sit in a windowless office. It may not be the best view, but you're not going to waste $8 million on making the glass reinforced. So during a TSCM pre-construction assistance, there's going to be a great emphasis placed on the physical and technical security standards being met. This is primarily for the military and intelligence services. There are specific physical security standards, and there are specific technical security standards. In pre-construction, TSCM pre-construction assistance, that's where we dig into these and we make sure that they are up to snuff and that they don't just merely pass, but they pass by a wide margin. Now, if you make it pass by a wide margin, there's going to be a profit problem, because the contractor, it's not going to be profitable for them. And so they'll start skimping and scraping and cheating and lying and conning and hustling, so they only make profit if they can scheme and scam. Don't let them. Apply the physical and technical security standards that are to be applied at the new top secret, the new skiff that's being built in the new government building that's being built, where they're just breaking ground this weekend. Make sure all those construction standards are rigidly abided by, and that once everything is done and built, that you have somebody come in and inspect all of those things before the contractor gets paid. Seriously, there's been hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars, of graft and corruption found with defense contractors, where they schemed, scammed, and lied to get paid, or they confected a company just to rip off the U.S. government. And they were in a process of ripping off 10, 20, $30 billion, and they got caught because somebody brought in a TSCM expert to do a TSCM analysis to see if the physical and technical standards had been met, and they hadn't been met, and there was a great deal of conspiracy between the officials running the project and the contractors running the project. And I may have been brought in by Congress more than once to harpoon this sort of mischief. So if you have TSCM pre-construction assistance done, they can follow the project as it's built. And as inspections are done, they will look for specific physical compliance and technical compliance. And then at the end of everything, they inspect again. And if there's any reason for any physical or technical failure, the contractor gets their final payment withheld until they fix the problems and they abide by the standards, which of course they will immediately claim, well, there was a change order, there was this, well, we had a meeting on that, well, no, they have to meet those standards or they don't get paid. So you just withhold 25% of their payment until they comply with everything, and you hold that over their head until your TSCM guy goes, okay, and sign off on it. TSCM pre-construction assistance is active through all phases of a project. When it is being planned and it's on paper or it's in a small foam 3D model, when it's being designed, before the ground is broken, there's already two aspects where a TSCM expert has been brought in. During the construction, that same TSCM person comes in and inspects at what appears to be random points, but are actual, very carefully selected points during the actual construction. And then there's the inspection of the premises for the acceptance, which means once the acceptance is done and the punch list has been completed, then they get the last pool of money, or they get that pool of money withheld while somebody else fixes their screw-ups. And boy, this is extraordinarily commonplace in the defense industry. Way, way, way more commonplace than what even Congress is aware of. And they've been quite appalled when, they've been quite appalled with some of the graft and corruption that's happened. Now, this also may include recurring on-site reviews, not just of the actual construction project, but of the building after it's constructed to see what deviations have taken place. For example, has a room been constructed that's not supposed to be constructed? Are telephone wires been run where there's not supposed to be telephone wires? Have Ambassador so-and-so's office suddenly a Macintosh has been installed that's running a mail server that it's not supposed to be running? So this is not coming in with equipment. This is coming in with flashlights and clipboards and things like that. Now, the biggest goal of a pre-construction assistance is to neutralize in advance and negate in advance technical devices employed by making the placement of those devices more difficult. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be bugs placed. It means that the person installing those bugs or agency installing those bugs have many, many hurdles to jump over. And even though they hook it up and they think everything's fine, they can't get it to work. And they'll spend days and hours and often careers trying to get it to work. And the more time and effort they put into trying to get it to work, the more screwed up everything is getting. And that means your TSCM guy is doing a good job. And he's just frustrating everything that the SPI does. This also involves providing expert advice regarding the design and installation of various elements of physical and electronic security. At federal facilities prior to 1983, there was a huge problem. At federal facilities prior to 9/11, there was an even bigger problem. Now that 9/11 has come and gone and it's over 20 years behind us, government facility security is now becoming more lax than it was pre-9/11. And there's a lot of people asleep at the wheel. When you bring a TSCM expert in, they find where the wheel is, they find out who's sleeping at the wheel, and they bring to your attention all your vulnerabilities. and all your weaknesses and all the places where your opponent or your enemy or your country's enemy is attacking your facility. So let's review this again. Pre-construction assistance is going to identify weaknesses in doors, locks, alarms, video cameras, fence lines, telephone systems, network and related infrastructure, and computer security. We're not just looking for problems, we're looking for problems, things that could be problems, might be problems, weaknesses, anything that the spy could exploit, and document, of course. Now, a TSCM screening is a different type of TSCM services. It is the examining of equipment and furnishings prior to their introduction into a facility that has previously received a TSCM survey. So you don't slide stuff in to a place that's been checked until you have it checked through a screening service. The U.S. government, they send them to certain very specific locations. So you would, for example, buy a coffee maker that you wanted to use in the command post. You would then send that to an inspection operation. They would take it apart, they would inspect it, they would examine every component, they would put it back together, they'd put a seal on it, they'd put it in a special classified bag, they'd give it to a ComSec courier who would then bring it to you and go, okay, now you can put coffee in it. Coffee maker costs $20. The U.S. government, spends $20,000 to inspect it, but that's what you have to do. But just done when you're introducing stuff into a facility that's already believed to be clean. Now, this also has to be done with repaired items, replacement items, new acquisitions. So, example, if your phone was working and has had bug sweeps done to it, then if you buy a new handset, you need to have the handset checked. But if you're using it on your existing phone, you would not have to have the phone swapped out. Now, many phones can have problems. So in a TSCM screening, we're looking for the problems with the NTTs, with the ROMs, with the Lucent, the Merlins. Everybody's phones, we're looking at those in a screening. So an executive wants to have a second phone for their office. The first phone has already been checked. So now we have to check the second phone, and then we'll deliver it, we'll hook it up, and while we're there, we'll check his office to see if anything else is out of kilter. We also have to check things like modems and fax machines, anything that emits RF energy. Even though the FCC says it's fine, you may still be able to pick up the signal at a significant distance. So, for example, there was a modem called the Practical Peripherals modem. They were very good. They did a great job. They were very low error rates, but the early versions of them, when they would go off hook, which means they're on a call, it would transmit whatever the data was at 114 megahertz. So all you had to do was sit down the street with a 114 megahertz antenna, aim it towards your target, and then you could record all their login passwords, all their email, everything. Now Motorola, they had a similar problem. Theirs was 298 megahertz. So everything that comes into an area that you're concerned about, it has to be screened. And in the case of these modems, you would have to take a modem that was transmitting 114 megahertz, and you would have to modify it so that it was install some filters and modify some circuits so that it was no longer doing that. The same thing with the Motorola. They wanted the Motorola. They couldn't live without the Motorola. We had to use the Motorola's, but we had to open them all up and modify some circuitry and wire in some inductors and capacitors and make some little filters in there to filter out all the nasty stuff that was going on and leaking to significant distances. And in both of these cases, these signals could be picked up over 1,500 feet away. I believe the Motorola was close to 2.5 miles. Now, TSCM screening also looks at off-the-shelf computers. So, for example, some years back, the infrared DA port was a huge problem. Now USB ports are a huge problem. Now Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is a huge problem. So you can have several dozen laptops sent to a TSCM facility. They will take those laptops apart and they will remove the Wi-Fi circuits. They will remove the Bluetooth circuits. So no matter what a user does, it's going to show that they don't have that hardware that they need. So like with the IRDA, somebody could actually walk up to the window outside somebody's office after hours, and then through this port they could download the entire computer without actually having physical access to it. Now if somebody has if they have access to your Wi-Fi, there's actually a whole bunch of really cool things that they can do to force their way in to the computer and download all your files. Same thing with Bluetooth. Bluetooth on most modern laptops allows hard drive access, which means they can get access to your hard drive without going through your operating system, and your antivirus software will not catch it. So TSCM screening is also taking computer equipment and modifying it so it physically cannot connect except, for example, a hardwired Ethernet connection. So when you're traveling, you've got your data on your computer, but there's no outside way to access it. In fact, when doing screening work on laptops, it's not uncommon for us to provide a company with a laptop that is completely empty of anything, and the only way that you can get anything at all onto the laptop is there's a hidden micro USB port or a hidden USB-C port underneath one of the keys on the keyboard. So you have to pry that key up, plug your USB-C into that, because none of the other USB ports anywhere on the computer are actually functional. They're still there. You can plug stuff into it, but there's no power at it and there's no data connection. The only way to load and unload is to go through that, flip that key up, pry the key up with your fingernail, plug in there, and then push the key back in and latch it in place when you're finished. Now, if somebody x-rays it, they're going to know that you've done this. So maybe then you only access it through the Ethernet port. So files are all loaded on through the Ethernet port, and then that computer is taken out of the country, and there's no restricted or proprietary data on it when it crosses through customs in a foreign country, where they're going to take the computer and suck all the data off of it and then give it to their government. So screening also involves tightening down a thing that will be moving across international boundaries. Now, an AM/FM radio that you buy at Best Buy, which is brand new, nobody's tampered with it. If you bring that into a classified area where it's called a SCIF, so if you bring it into a SCIF, most of those radios actually transmit room audio due to a design error. There's a very specific design error, and that design error can be used to exploit it. And it's not so much that anybody's modified it, it's as it was from the factory. And the way it was from the factory is there are certain circuits that are needed to make AM, FM, satellite radios and so forth work. Those have to be shielded before they can be introduced into a classified area. And I strongly recommend that you never bring an AM radio, an FM radio, a two-way radio, a cell phone, a ham radio, a walkie-talkie, never, or satellite radio, never bring those into rooms where there's classified data being processed, handled, talked about. But if somebody really wants an FM radio, they submit it for TSCM screening. It's a $15 radio. It costs $15,000 to screen it, and it is tuned to pick up one and only one radio station, and the entire tuning section is removed from that radio. But it picks up those stations really, really well. but all the mixing circuits have been removed to remove a danger which those hold to the encryption equipment. For some reason, we don't want to get radios or things that radiate signals too close to encryption equipment because it causes a major vulnerability that will cause a mixing with the crypto signals, and you will retrieve classified information over the airwaves. So have some self-control, folks. You don't need to have your iPhone, your iPad, your iPod, your Galaxy earbuds. None of that has any business. You can go in there and just listen to the jibber jabber of everybody at work. You don't need to have a radio on your desk, and if you do, you need to consider working for someplace else because you don't have the discipline necessary to handle classified information and so on. So no radios at work. If you have to have a radio because your head is very big and you need to listen to your rock and roll while you're working in a crypto vault, get one and pay $15,000 to have the whole front end of it rebuilt. And maybe you might be able to get this admitted into your work center. But if you try it, people who try to introduce coffee pots, clocks, radios, they usually get a little flag next to their name on their security investigations. And if it gets pushed a little bit too hard, they figure that you're trying to introduce a bugging device into a classified area. So if you value your security clearance, don't try to get AM radios, FM radios, shortwave radios. You don't need that at work. If you need that at work, the government's going to provide it for you. So you can sit there and listen to, software-defined radio and pick up every single radio channel that exists within 100 miles, and then you can extract them from one another. And people can log in to the server that has these files in it, and they can listen from their desks. You don't need off-the-counter, over-the-counter commercial radio equipment at work. Grow up, folks. We're not in high school anymore. Now, TSCM screening also involves eavesdropping equipment or eavesdropping devices that have been installed into equipment or furnishings prior to delivery. So I'll give you an example. You buy a copy machine or a typewriter or an over-the-counter HP laser printer. How do you know that that laser printer hasn't been bugged before it got there? How do you know that that Cisco router hasn't been tampered with before it got there? Those things are exceptionally popular for tampering with intelligence agencies. It could be a U.S. intelligence agency, a Canadian intelligence agency, German, it could be Russian, Chinese, North Korean, it could be from India. Eavesdroppers from India aren't as out of touch as people think. Or it could just be a gift from a vendor or a salesman. They could give you a nice pen set for your desk where it's extremely well bugged. They could give you a fabulous coffee cup it's got your name on it. It's got something cute from the company. It's also got a bug in the base of it or in the handle of it. Or they gave you a set of golf clubs. Oh boy, don't get me started on that. Now, special TSCM services are different from any other type of TSCM service. It is highly targeted businesses, highly targeted government officials, and highly important social gatherings. It's normally associated with senior or VIP personnel in a company or government agency. There is a high to extremely high probability of hostile targeting by a foreign intelligence service. This is especially important when military people are traveling overseas, or when Department of State people are traveling overseas, or Department of State people are just going to church. They're going to be targeted, and the level of probability is much higher than it is for any other type of situation. In for special TSCM services also includes areas which are generally not secure, such as motels, vehicles, boats, aircraft residences. If you have to have your aircraft TSCM inspection done on your aircraft, every single time you use it, you're going to have another TSCM inspection done on that aircraft. It's really a problem. Boats, same way. You're going to have some of your friends are going to go out on your 125-foot yacht for 2 weeks. Awesome. You're going to have a bug sweep done that will span a week before the ship leaves. Awesome. And then it comes back, check it again, and then before your next junket, have it checked again. It's an unending. Every single time you use the boat or the aircraft, you have to have it checked again. Even if you park it in a secure hangar and you think it's secure, that is some of the most vulnerable places it can be. If you have an executive who travels a lot, has to stay in motels, you got to have the motels checked. These are normally not secure in a sense of you have bug sweeps done there often. You just have to know some tactics, which I will cover in other videos, how to deal with motels. The residences are usually the softest part of an executive's life because they just simply don't have people there doing bug sweeps all the time. Typical Fortune 500 CEO or director of the board, they might get a bug sweep done to their home every 5 years, and then they usually get it done too late, and it's a reactive thing, not a proactive thing. You got to involve the VIP's residences in the bug sweep program for the company, and it's not done for them as an individual thing like painting their walls. This is a business thing that's being done that is directed by the corporate counsel, not the security director. So they're making sure the CEO's residence is clear so that when he's talking to a spouse and they're dropping details about work, that their daughter isn't picking it up and recording it and live casting it on YouTube. So we make sure that their residences are reasonably secure against bugs, that they're relatively free of bugging devices. We make sure that the motels and hotels and resorts are relatively secure. They're not secure when the bodyguard details get there, and they're not really secure the whole time that the client is there, but given the time available, all best efforts are expended. Now, specialized situations where it's a non-security function, which means it is assumed that the function is not secure and cannot be reasonably made to be secure. So TSCM services are performed as an executive moves around or his family moves around. Examples of this would be trade shows, VIP visits, social gatherings, private events like weddings for celebrities. Celebrities are extraordinarily protective of their privacy when it comes to their weddings, funerals, family events. The paparazzi are just ruthless with harassing the celebrities, and there's some things that TSCM people can do to frustrate the paparazzis and bring a certain level of privacy to weddings, funerals, and private events that in all decency should be left private. Now, these services are very commonly provided to senior executives. If you're not doing it already, you should consider expanding these services to your scientists, all of your attorneys. Any person who is a medical doctor needs these services. Anybody in a sensitive or high publicity assignment, such as reporters, astronauts, public figures, politicians, entertainers, actors, actresses, voice talent on the radio, rock groups, country western stars, any type of entertainment that gets an individual out in front of people, they really need to consider looking at some special TSCM services, which is not a full TSCM sweep or a full TSCM inspection, but are things very specific to the threats that they face. Now, there is, sadly, a type of bug sweep which is regarded by most of the people in our profession as a shameful situation. It's called a rain dance. And that's the name that's been on it for about 70 years. Rain dancing is done when somebody who is inadequately trained with little or no formal education in electronics, who jumps around and waves a wand, they also call them wand wavers, who they're doing stuff, but they're not doing stuff with real equipment, and they're not doing anything other than extracting money from your pocketbook. They can't even explain the function of their own equipment. And if you ask them any type of technical information about what they're looking for, you will not get a straight answer. And some of the funniest incidents have been when some senior executive who is a PhD in electronics engineering ends up with a rain dancing person, comes in, spends a couple of days dancing around his office, waving a box with a stick, metal stick on the end. And at the end, he presents a written report in person. And so the executive asks him a few questions. Not extremely technical questions, but things like calculating free space loss and what's the displayed average noise level of this instrument that you're using, and how much does it take to saturate the front end, and things like that. Anybody who's skilled with a spectrum analyzer can answer this, but somebody who's just a bodybuilder from the local gym they didn't even own this equipment 5 days ago. So it's not uncommon for rain dancers a customer will ask them, well, can you do a bug sweep? Oh, yes, they can do a bug sweep, but they don't own any bug sweep equipment. So they frantically call trying to rent it from somebody, or they frantically call trying to buy it from somebody. And companies which sell bug sweep equipment are kind of they're not very talkative about what they're doing, making, and selling, because they can only sell it to you as citizens. And if you call them frantically and you claim to be a private investigator, a legitimate company's not going to sell you anything. They're going to ask lots of questions, and then they're going to want to meet with you in person. And by the time that's all said and done, there's a problem. They've lost the project. So here's what I recommend to private investigators that you do. Retired police officers, security consultants, bodyguards. If somebody says that they need to have a bug sweep done, say the following: I don't provide those services. I do not have that equipment. However, through my extensive network of contacts, I know people who do, and I actually know the top 3 companies in the entire world who do this, and I can have them here tonight. And then give us a call. And if we're not available, we'll send you to one of our competitors who will moan and grumble, but they'll be happy that you called them. We don't have a problem sending you to our competitors, but we're not going to sell you the equipment so that you can embarrass yourself. But we will do the equipment for you. We will bring equipment that you need, but you won't be allowed to use it. We'll use the equipment. You can supervise, and in the end, it will cost you a lot less and probably save you your job. So just a little helpful information there. Now, a rain dancer usually has minimal tools, and unfortunately, a lot of them just buy movie props off eBay, and I'm not kidding. There's been a number of spy shops that bought a prop off eBay and they just copied it because people recognized it from the movie, or they put it into a suitcase just like what they had on the movie, and people are emotionally invested in this prop, but there's nothing in the box. It's not that it doesn't even work. It's that it's not supposed to work. It's a box with a stick on it that you walk around and wave. And when they actually shot the movie, they made two of them, one of which they put a red light in, and they could turn that red light on and off, or they could make the meter swing left to right remotely, but it didn't actually have anything to do with what you were picking up. So these prop boxes are typically, it's a small handheld box. The rain dancer walks around for a few hours looking at it. It clicks and beeps and geeks, but he can't tell you what's really going on with it. He can't interpret the results. And if you're an engineer and you ask, oh, well, what does it mean when it does that? You've just caught yourself a rain dancer. And it's really tragic, but it'll only happen to you a couple of times until you smarten up and learn to ask the right questions and hire a legit company like ours. Now, it's common for a rain dancer to find bugs because most rain dancers bring one or more bug with them so they can find the bug that they brought with them. I know of a number of cases where this has happened, and that where somebody went out, they would do 100 bug sweeps. Every single time they did a bug sweep, they found a bug. Now the problem, they were only in the building for 4 hours, and they always found the same bug, and they would forget that that's the same bug that they found 4.5 years ago, and here's the photographs of it from 4.5 years ago, and it's the exact same photograph of what he just claimed last night. Okay. And ultimately it came out that he was embezzling money from his customers and getting huge checks. And the problem is he was half blind, half deaf, had zero TSCM training, had no college background, never served in the military, and all of his knowledge came from his experience as being a ham radio guy, and he could talk ham radio stuff, but he didn't know how to do a bug sweep, and it was so tragic. It destroyed his family, it destroyed him, it destroyed his friends. It just was really, really ugly. So if you're rain dancing, please don't bring bugs because it's going to backfire. And if you bring the wrong bug to the wrong place and you find it and you're the hero and you get paid and everything, and that bug gets introduced into the law enforcement community and somebody starts doing forensic analysis work on it, they're going to rip you apart. It's just a matter of time. You might get away with it 10 times. You might get away with it 25, 100 times. And you might get a little money here, a little bit of money there. But you'll make more money if you just bring in a legitimate organization like ours with legitimate sweep gear like ours, with people who have thousands of hours of training like ours, who can do the bug sweep for you. So instead of saying, yes, I can do that, instead say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that, but I know of somebody who can. Your customer will be appreciative that you had the integrity to admit what you couldn't do, but would be impressed with your resourcefulness for knowing who to call and not rip them off. Now, to do rain dancing, you need about 4 hours of training. To do it well, you need only 2, maybe 3 days, and that's most of that time is to teach you how not to look like an idiot. There used to be one school in New York City that would actually certify you to do bug sweeps with just a 1-day class. And it was 6 hours long. 4 hours of that was a sales pitch for all the other stuff they made. So you're only getting a 2-hour class. And you would pay $25,000 to $50,000 for this thing you put in your pocket that they were bringing in from China. The total cost to them was about $25. So there's a big difference between $25,000 and $25. So they were marking everything up 1,000 to 1. And after they did this a few times too many, people came in with guns and knives, and they insisted on a refund, which they got. That company had been repeatedly sued for selling fraudulent products, and it's not until somebody got together with a few of their friends and came in, trashed the store, beat up some of the salespeople, including the salesman who had actually ripped the guy off. And then they held the people in the store hostage at gunpoint until the owner showed up to give the cash back that had been embezzled from the client. It was a pretty drama-laden year for that particular company, too, for other reasons. Now, rain dances almost always involve high-pressure sales tactics. It feels almost like you're buying a new car. They sell paranoia, so they make you afraid, and then they sell you a way to fix your paranoia, and they have props with all kinds of flashing lights. They always have glossy sales material, so if you're going to sell rain dances, you got to have glossy sales material. You have to have the old joke is a business card with gold foil on it. You got to have that. You got to have a portfolio that you put all the glossy sales materials in, and they may spend $100 to do one folder, and it has to be done today. We got to get people out there today, right now, tomorrow. So there's a huge push. They don't want you to think about it. They want you to give them your credit card number so that they can schedule people out there the same night. And the people they send out, they don't know what they're doing. They just know how to dance around a room and pretend with props, movie props of flashing lights, glossy sales material, tons of paranoia, because, they're out to get you. So please, don't do business with anybody who does high pressure sales tactics. Don't do business with people who try to prey on paranoia. Watch it with the glossy sales materials, and movie props of flashing lights should be a dead giveaway. Now, in the past, it's been a while since we've seen this, but there's been some real clown shows over the years. People doing bug sweeps that show up in lab coats, lab smocks, or even trench coats to do bug sweeps. So they look like they just stepped right out of central casting. Or there was a company in Albany, New York, who every time they would have a bug sweep done, literally helicopters would hover over the building, and the the bug sweep people would throw ropes out the side of the helicopters, and they would rappel down these ropes dressed in military BDUs, black, and they had special shirts on, and they had helmets on and it was a paramilitary attack on their corporate offices. And then they would lower down the bug sweep gear, and they would rappel down the side of the building. It's a scam. It's all a scam. Or they would have the guys who would have shoulder holsters and badges so they could flash a badge to impress the client. People who do bug sweeps don't wear shoulder holsters. They're uncomfortable as hell. They generally don't carry badges because they don't need them. They're engineers and scientists. Okay, these are all just major scams. So we haven't seen these jokers for a number of years. They kind of evaporated in 96, 97 when the internet started getting really, really hot, and people started learning, oh, wait, there is more than one bug sweep company in the entire United States. Wow, I can't believe we've spent $2 million. We have a $2 million a year contract so they can show up in helicopters every 90 days. Yeah, there's a problem there. It's the reason that company doesn't exist anymore, and these other companies don't exist anymore. So thank you very much for watching this video all the way through. I promise and threaten that there will be many, many more. They are all preloaded, ready to rock on their release dates. I'm not going to accelerate when they release. They'll release on the dates they've been scheduled. But count on coming to this channel where you will learn more about TSCM and related disciplines than you could possibly imagine even exists. And oh boy, wait until we start getting down into some of the dirty, dirty details of how to do a bug sweep. Thank you. And visit our website at www.tscm.com, where you will find about 65,000 plus pages of documents all about bug sweeps and electronics involving bug sweeps, pictures of bugs, videos of bugs, everything you can possibly imagine. It's a one-stop shopping about how to find bugs, wiretap spies, how to catch actual spies, how to catch people who are committing treason, people who are agents of foreign influence, how they're caught, all kinds of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of pages of free data. So free data, and thank heavens for the First Amendment, because we practice it aggressively here. So have a good day, and look back in a couple of days to see what new kind of mischief we're up to. Take care.